Well, two things came to mind when I was first asked to speak here. And one was that I was going to get mixed up with Dan Macchiarella. And the other was that previous presenters were going to be talking some similar subject matter. And both have happened. So bear with me, and hopefully I can shed a little different perspective to you on some of the similar topics. Well, first off, I want to thank Dr. Butler for this opportunity to be with all of you today. I am from Raydon Corporation, and Raydon's been in the industry for about 30 years. We celebrate our 30th anniversary next month, actually. And we've been in the ground-based simulation, basically, for U.S. military. Years ago, when I was looking for a college to attend, or university, I considered Embry Riddle. But back then, just for me, living in upstate New York, it was just too far away, and I never had any intentions of going to Florida. Well, life has a way of taking on different roads. And basically now I'm living and working just down the road in Port Orange. Over the years, I've learned that there's a common thread that runs through simulation engineering. From the development of the first flight simulator, the blue box, which you've heard about already, to today's vast simulation-based training products leveraging gaming technology to disrupt the norm and produce more effective and economic simulation for an ever larger audience. In the past, this drive to develop training solutions has been fueled by problems needing solutions. Today, you might say that technology has created an environment where there's actually solutions now looking for problems to solve, causing engineers and technologists to imagine the possibilities and to innovate like never before. Most of you have heard of Ed Link. Ed saw a problem. He wanted to learn to fly, but his first flying lesson for $50 back in 1929 left him so dissatisfied. The instructor didn't even let him touch the controls for that price, which, by the way, in those days, or today's dollars, would have been about $720. So, in order to make flying lessons more affordable and effective, he invented and received a patent in 1931 for his flight trainer, which he dubbed the pilot maker. And as you heard, he used organ bellows from his father's piano piano and organ company to simulate the motion. He would inflate and deflate the bellows. So ironically, aviation schools had no interest, but amusement park operators did. So the first flight simulators were actually used as amusement rides. Now you see there's a picture of Ed and the classic blue box. However, Ed understood the value of his pilot maker, and he never gave up, and the problem that it solved. So he opened his own flight school, and he advertised that he could learn to fly for $85. And it paid off in 1934. That's when his first orders came from the U.S. Army Air Corps. They bought the first 6 trainers for $3,500 apiece after Ed made a sales pitch for them when he flew into Newark Field in New Jersey, right? And he flew in very unfavorable conditions, which most people would not land in. When he touched down, he was asked how he was able to do it. And he said, I learned on my pilot maker. And they were immediately sold. Right? So during World War II, imagine over 10,000 blue boxes were produced and over 500,000 airmen were taught using the Link trainer. Pretty amazing. I had the privilege of starting my career at Ed Link's company. By then, it had become known as the Singer Link Flight Simulation. Ed was still living when I started working, but I never got the opportunity to meet him. He had long since retired. I remember one day one of my mentors asked me, hey, would you like to go up and see the old room where Ed Link's stuff is stored? I said, sure, why not? There, stuffed in cardboard boxes, were notebooks filled with Link's ideas, his various components from some of his inventions, were on benches, and even some of his undersea exploration work. So the man was truly a genius, and he left quite an impression on this fresh out of college, wet behind the ears engineer. If you were really passionate about what you believed, the sky was the limit as to what you could accomplish. Now, ever since the blue box, the use of simulation for training has grown and has continuously evolved, adapting new technology as it goes. Time and time again, it has proven to be an important way to provide crucial training in a host of settings too dangerous or too costly to try in the real world. Today, the simulation-related training environments encompass a multitude of areas, as you've heard also before, such as, obviously, the flight simulation, but the ground-based training, maritime, gunnery, emergency, disaster, medical, industrial, human capital, and sports. Today, let's identify some of the major elements that make up the simulation systems and discuss how some technology has impacted their design and development and how new disruptive technology is affecting the industry. Let's begin with computers, right? The computational piece in simulation has and continues to be the linchpin. It all revolves around the math modeling and the number crunching. Back when Ed Link was developing his blue box, the digital computer didn't exist. Rough computations were performed via analog circuits, electromechanical relays, and a whole lot of physical space and power. When I started my career in the 80s, we were looking good, man. We had mainframe computers down to 2 to 3 cabinets. That's what I remember seeing when I first, the washing machine on the right is the disk drive. Amazing. CPU boards cost like $40,000 a piece. I remember one time they underestimated the computation power needed on a project, and that was really a big issue in our company because it could actually affect the bottom line. Back then, personal computers were in their infancy, and the idea of using them in simulation versus the behemoth computers was not even a consideration. Today, the use of PCs is obviously the norm. Consumer-grade gaming computers have been adapted by some companies to perform all the needed simulation. In fact, at Raydon, we were one of the early disruptors, daring to replace custom dedicated mainframes with COTS, commercial off-the-shelf PCs for military simulation. We've now reached a point where only one PC is needed for the entire simulator, including all the visual channels, image generation, motion control. Just one PC to do it all. What's next? How about devices with downloadable simulation apps running on the upcoming 5G network? Well, it's happening as we speak, but I'm not talking just about video games, right? Full-fledged simulation training. At Raydon, we've taken a step in this direction by venturing into sports simulation training. Our Burst VR product line is launching an exciting quarterback training app for iOS and Android phones. Using their own smartphones, students will be able to learn strategy and technique by virtually going through all the various exercises and various plays. Imagine also, coupled with this, the possibility of the IoT, the Internet of Things. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, and here's some definitions. But what really struck me is that they're saying as many as 50 billion devices will be online by the end of the decade. So now you begin to connect the physical world systems to the simulation world, and your blue sky thinking can run wild. As a matter of fact, Microsoft just announced a couple of weeks ago that it will be spending $5 billion on IoT-related research, products, and infrastructure over the next 4 years. Now let's talk about the simulation engine. Okay, now this is where all the modeling of the physical world and the interactions with the simulated world come together. In the past, no standardization occurred, no open architecture. There was proprietary, custom, clumsy solutions written in various coding languages. When Microsoft Windows and PCs came along, some standardization started to occur. But most companies still did things their own way. Today's simulation training companies are adapting consumer game engines, such as you even heard previously, as Unity and Unreal, to rapidly develop game-quality products for military training. Leveraging the vast amounts of resources these companies have and their worldwide base of users is almost like using crowdsourcing in a way, right? You're taking advantage of this economy of scale and gives a shorter product development time for providing the ability to purchase and download from the internet such assets as physical models for driving or for flying, graphics models of vehicles, equipment, people, you name it. This is a great cost reduction. We've seen it, directly applied at Raydon. This is all available at a cost orders of magnitude lower than the typical organically developed way in organizations, which usually requires a lot of time, money, and people resources, which is a big impact. Now, there are online marketplaces like the Unity Asset Store, which you can quickly purchase and downgrade apps. Open source software drives this as well. From simple algorithms to new tech to complete new systems, all are being open sourced more and more from such companies as Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and, believe it or not, even Amazon. That leads us to image generation. This is a vital sensory stimulus or cueing that is created in order to display a virtual environment in the simulation. Back in the day, there was none. The blue box had a canopy. You put it over the student, and it simulated flight, night flying, or clouds, while the student practiced IFR. Image generation has come a long way, using movie film to miniature models. I remember seeing these model boards at Link years ago, where all the details, huge lights, multi-thousand watt lights, and it was an incredible thing. But that was considered real cool. That was the thing back then, right? So now we have basically total Earth modeled in high resolution and readily available for general use. This is a typical image scene of ground-based training that we had back in 2002. Looked pretty good back then. And today, this is typical of some of our scenery and imagery. A lot of detail, especially on the ground, when you consider ground vehicles and what you have to do. We've worked on IEDs, route clearances, and things of that nature, so you really need to have the detail. Now, the image generators have evolved, right? Before, there used to be also room-filling cabinets. Now, you can buy a graphics card for about $800 from such companies as NVIDIA and AMD Raydon. Where before, multiple IGs packaged in large computer racks were needed, now one graphics card housed in a PC can run multiple video channels on your simulator. What's next? Well, consider cloud-based image rendering in a standardized open architecture that can be used on multiple platforms within a common environment. It's being asked for. Then you have the visual system, right? That plays a vital role. This goes hand in hand with the image generation. That's the hardware that allows the simulated environment to be presented to the student. Right? In the past, we had the bulky CRTs, the heavy mirrors, the $100,000 piece of GE light valve projectors. These are all relics of the past. Now, of course, today the buzzwords are VR, AR, MR, or mixed reality. And I'll put up a slide of that, but most of you are obviously aware of that. And like was previously alluded by a question by the Colonel, sometimes it's a lot of eye candy and it catches a lot of attention of people that really think that that's the greatest. But there are some pitfalls, and we're going to discuss that. Well, I want to draw your attention to the MR, the mixed reality. For us, this is really a potentially cool capability where now you're mixing the augmented reality or the computer-generated scenes with the physical world, and you include occlusion, right? So you can actually hide virtual soldiers behind real buildings, or vice versa for training. So that's very compelling. Consumer headsets from the gaming world are being adapted, as you heard, for simulation. There are a myriad of companies today, and we've looked at most of these right here. In VR, there's Oculus and Vive. They seem to be the big players. In AR, the HoloLens, obviously, Magic Leap, Daiquiri, to name a few. The competition in this is fierce, and venture capitalists are flocking to this. In 2017, over $3 billion were invested. And Raydon was a very early adapter of VR. We first started delivering VR maneuver and gunnery training systems over 15 years ago with head-mounted displays, or HMDs, that cost close to $30,000 each at the time. Now you can get consumer headsets well under $1,000, and they're going even lower. And there are several capable of performing in various training environments. However, we have found some limitations. For example, the wide field of view is critical to some training, but it comes with trade-off. Because in general, the wider the field of view, the less pixel density, and thus lower the resolution. And here's a chart that basically illustrates that. Currently, AR devices, such as Microsoft's, I keep saying that, HoloLens, they only have 40 degrees field of view. So I don't know if any of you have ever tried that, but it is almost very tunneling effect. So if you increase the field of view, you potentially would get what's called screen door effect, where the pixels are optically enlarged. But there's new technology out there that we recently read about that bolsters claims the device is approaching near eye or human eye resolution and 100 degrees field of view. But now they're saying that these are going to go up in price. They're actually shipping alpha prototypes to some developers. So now you have to start looking at the economics, right? Increased performance versus versus the higher cost. Here's some examples of how AR headsets are used. You've seen some of these in the medical and in the industrial field for maintenance and training. And at Raydon, we're using it for virtual design, concepting, virtual design reviews. We're trying out new configurations. And one of our constraints is a lot of our trainers go in trailers. So access to and maintainability of the systems and how they would be used, the ergonomics, all that. You can virtually take a look at that. Another limiting factor at this moment that needs to be fully assessed is the occurrence of what is known in the industry as simulation adaptation syndrome, or SAS, right? While wearing the devices. We can spend a whole lot of time discussing SAS, but it's basically a form of motion sickness because of what goes on in your vestibular system during exposure to all the visual cues. Later we'll talk about researchers' possible solutions to this phenomenon, but some of the reasons we try to reduce SAS in simulation systems are to allow more people to train without feeling sick, obviously, but to allow people to train longer, that is, not drop out of training, which is important in some scenarios, which could last, more than just 10 or 15 minutes, and to prevent sickness effects that may linger after simulation exposure. I'm witness to that. I've recently had that experience. Weight inertia of the VR is also a concern. They come up with these great systems and they're big wraparound, but now, people are going to say, wow, this is heavy, it's hurting my neck. But that's surely got to be overcome with more, as the display technology advances. Another is the tendency to perspire, right? The displays they get warm, poor air circulation. So if you're going to be training multiple people, now hygiene is going to be a consideration. So you have to provide ways of actually cleaning the surfaces. Or here's a company, they've got a hyperskin, an actual mask you wear over the device, right? So there are contributing factors. These are all contributing factors to be considered in the overall acceptance of the devices. Now, today, large format LEDs and OLEDs are entering the simulation arena. You've seen smaller displays, but we actually experimented with large 65-inch consumer-grade displays from such companies as LG and Samsung. The objective was to find out, could we mount them on a motion platform and survive the shock and vibration and give you the training that you needed. Now, obviously the appeal was it's a low cost, and you take advantage of the latest state-of-the-art and visual display technology, which the consumers usually get at first. So we came up with the design to successfully fasten the TVs and allow them to survive. Here was our concept. Basically, we mounted them on our motion platform, and these were dubbed curved displays. They're slightly curved, but and they're very thin. So what we were able to do was we actually were able to overlap the bezels, so to minimize the distraction. So the bezels were narrow as they were, but once we overlapped them, it was a very small bezel width and was very distracting. And we came up with a neat way to grab onto various shapes and form factors of displays. And we actually produced a prototype. Here's our prototype that's running today. Again, very, very effective. We did endurance testing on it and shook it and vibrated it, and it seems to survive. Now let's move on to the training content. You've heard about that. There's been a lot of talk on that. At Raydon, we say content is king. Content is the core to how the training is going to be conducted. It's the curriculum, the training scenarios, the virtual environment, the effects, the after-action review, all bundled together to produce the compelling training experience. It's probably the most critical aspect of simulation training. If it doesn't effectively come together to teach the student, then what good is the simulation? We know that not everyone trains with the same knowledge base and not everyone learns at the same speed. So, how do you assess training effectiveness across a wide range of students? Well, first you apply human sciences and structural design principles to create training content with the help of knowledgeable subject matter experts, and that's a key. And we do that with the government. And baseline, and once the content is deployed, you collect data, right? You collect data. You develop proficiency baselines, and you assess how students are doing against those baselines. 87 years ago, when Link developed the blue box, knowledge in these areas was limited, obviously, and the technology to do this didn't exist. Today, there are tools to assess training effectiveness. More research is occurring that utilizes advances in machine learning. This, along with the ability to use COTS, biometric sensors, wearable devices, will help produce AI artificial intelligence systems that can automate student assessments and adjust scenarios based on training results and stress level of students. Why is this important? Well, for example, in some of the areas we're pursuing, in police pursuit training, instructors need to assess how students perceiving potential traffic and pedestrian hazards during a high-speed chase. They tend to have tunnel vision. They're just focused on the guy they're going after. What if the head or eye tracking devices, along with pulse sensors, can help collect data that can be used to identify areas requiring remedial or alter scenarios? Imagine the training curriculum automatically adapting to provide the right training tailored for that individual. That's what they're asking for. Another important element is the instructor-operator experience. As John's presentation described, usually there's an instructor participating in training of 1 to n students in some of our systems. There are various levels of instructor interactions. Some type of simulation training places a heavy demand on the instructors, while others require minimal instructor guidance. Today, the hardware and software technology that the instructor uses to interface with the simulator has come a long way. Human factors engineers have deployed streamlined, intuitive touchscreen interfaces that can greatly improve the instructor's experience. Here too, research is being conducted in how AI can help alleviate instructors' workload, especially if it involves trying to keep track of various students in a collective simulation training environment. Oops, did we miss? All right, okay. I missed one thing I want to show you. This is some of the flexible technology that's going on out there too that we're looking at. Obviously, it's a small format, but it's going to get larger. Here's the iOS in Links Day. You saw that in the bottom left. There's an instructor station in the Apollo era. Every instrument, every switch, every knob was duplicated at the instructor station. Talk about workload overload. Here's an example of our iOS at Raydon. We're using a very high resolution Windows Microsoft Studio platform. The little base you see there that just looks like just the base of the all-in-one, that's everything. The computer, the power supply, all housed in that. Totally fanless. And to the left is an example of one of our user interfaces, right? What our goal is to make them very intuitive. With very little or no instruction, an instructor can look at the interface and select the type of training he needs, the type of terrain that needs to be selected for the training. So that's one of our big goals, and that's what we're currently working on. Finally, there's the motion systems. Not all simulation training systems have a need for motion systems. Those that do are primarily related to flight or driver training. What do motion systems do? Well, you obviously know you can't replicate the complete physical world sensations of movement, although I've seen some in the driving simulation systems where they're the size of an auditorium, but motion systems on rails going back and forth to try to actually replicate the real forces. But what happens here? For example, as a flight simulator begins to accelerate down a virtual runway, right, the motion platform pitches up. This causes the horizontal component of force to act on the body, and is translated as cueing accelerations on the body. Earlier I mentioned occurrences of SAS while wearing HMDs. Well, motion systems have also been known to produce similar results in some people. Your vestibular systems is being fooled into thinking your body is in various attitudes or accelerations when you're not. This coupled with what your eyesight is processing with the virtual imagery you're immersed in, boy, that can be a recipe for SAS. The design of motion systems has evolved from the blue box. Now, today, we used to have the big hydraulic systems. Now, basically, the electric servo motor systems, and you're all familiar with the big devices that big 6 DOFs, the classic Stewart platform. This is from a company called E2M Technologies, who we work with. Sometimes the fidelity of 6 degrees of freedom systems just is an overkill and too costly for an application. That's when other options can be considered. And at Raydon, something we do that may be a little different is to design just the right fidelity into the system to meet the training objective. In one of our research projects, we investigated the use of electric actuators that got their start in the entertainment industry. Perhaps you heard of D-Box. They're a company who got their start producing motion-capable movie seats. And as a matter of fact, some of their seats are at the Cobb Theater just down the road. They provide motion effects to motion pictures there's a motion cueing track in the video, just like there is a soundtrack. Now, and that's what their seats are like in the theaters. Now, they've adapted some of their components and products into simulation. And this is one of their actuators, very compact, very elegant design. And we've produced a very cost-effective 3-degree of freedom system incorporating these actuators for roll, pitch, and heave. And this is our little device. The actuators are actually embedded in the frame. We showed this we demonstrated this at ITSEC conference last fall. And on top, we have a very compact 3-projector visual system with high definition. And the whole thing basically plugs into a wall outlet. And it all runs on one computer. It has a reconfigurable cab, so you can actually virtually configure different cabs on the visual scene. And it has a very low-cost force feedback steering system. And it has a 6.5 by about 6.5 foot footprint. And what's really neat is that E2M Technologies has a mini 6-DOF. That's only 15 inches high. So you can put something like this in one of those little pods that you just saw, and basically now you have potentially to apply it to flight simulation. In some of our investigations on future ways to provide motion cueing, we run across a fascinating concept. Researchers at the Mayo Clinic have teamed up with a company called B-Motion and patented technology which they claim creates the sensation of motion in 3 degrees of freedom. The concept involves galvanic vestibular stimulation, GVS. Now recall that previously mentioned SAS and the effects on the vestibular system. Well, these folks are using GVS principles to induce motion sensations in multiple axes of movement on the human subject. They're looking to commercialize this for entertainment. Another player in this area is a company called, obviously, Samsung, big company, with a consumer device they call Entrim 4D. The possibility of replacing hardware-centric devices with a band around your head or embedded sensors in VR or AR devices seems intriguing, to say the least. Both Mayo Clinic and Samsung also claim that their respective devices can even help reduce the occurrences of SAS, because they're actually moving parts of your inner vestibular system. So back when Ed Link dared to solve the problem of learning to fly with his blue box, the technology needed to fulfill his dream either didn't exist or what was in its infancy. Today, the technology and capabilities available at our fingertips are staggering. Now, more than ever, we can dream big and actually make it come true. We can be the ones daring to solve the world's training needs with all sorts of innovative ideas and disruptive thinking. Seek out the problems that need to be solved, do the research, stay committed, stay motivated in what you believe in. I've heard the testimonials from war fighters returning from deployment. Some of what you do will actually save lives. It's an incredible, humbling experience, and one that I'm very proud to be a part of. For after all, this is why we do it in the end. Thank you.